6, well, we want to get started for the evening here. So welcome to night 3 of our first ever Penn State Cooking Classic. So before we get started, we'd love to hear again, if you are just joining us, where you're joining us from. So drop that in the chat. And feel free to include your college or campus too. We'd love to hear where you graduated from. And again, we will have opportunities for Q&A this evening, but you have to drop those questions in the Q&A and not in the chat for us to see those. Otherwise, they get lost in the chat. So thank you in advance for helping us that way. My name is Sean Goheen, and I'm, along with Alan, one of your co-hosts for the evening. I serve on the Development and Alumni Relations team in the Schreyer Honors College here. And I'm a proud graduate of the College of Liberal Arts and Schreyer, class of 2011, and I also proudly started at the Berks campus. My co-host this evening is Alan Shafranek, Director of Alumni Relations for the College of Agricultural Sciences. We're thrilled to be presenting this event as a proud partner of the Penn State Alumni Association and with the following colleges: Ag Sciences, Education, Information Sciences and Technology, and the following Commonwealth campuses: Abington, Altoona, Erie, or the Barron College, Harrisburg, and Schuylkill, as well as the Penn State World Campus and my unit, the Schreyer Honors College. If you've not already, please consider joining the Penn State Alumni Association, the world's largest dues-paying alumni association, and leverage the power of the Penn State Network, powered by Pride, with many amazing benefits, including events, the Penn Stater magazine, and access to the Penn State Alumni Library. You can learn more at alumni.psu.edu. Each night in this 4-part series, we are featuring a different food-related theme, so be sure to check out our last event next Wednesday if you enjoyed tonight's event. Food is a unifying theme across the Penn State experience, and Paul Clifford wrote about that in his CEO Insights for the month. And we are excited to have alumni and friends from all of our colleges and campuses, not only from across the Commonwealth, but from around the world, join us. Before we talk about tonight's presentation, though, we'd like to acknowledge the hard work of the College of IST Student Organization, User Experience Professionals Association, or UXPA, for their incredible work on the marketing materials for the Cooking Classic. They're a top-notch project management organization, and we were very impressed with their professionalism and abilities and are really excited about them joining the alumni ranks and their journeys ahead. So thank you, UXPA. Again, we'd also like to thank the Penn State Alumni Association for their support of this series. The series of events is meant to not only provide knowledge and understanding of a wide array of food-related topics, but also bring awareness to the university's food pantries. There are food pantries on campuses across the Commonwealth that help our Penn State students who are facing food insecurity. The link is in the chat for more information on this topic and how you can make a difference for current Penn State students. Thank you in advance for any support that you can show. Tonight, we are joined by Andy Hirneisen, MA, Extension Educator for Food Safety and Quality with Penn State Ag Extension, and also Sharon McDonald, Senior Extension Educator and Food Specialist with Penn State Ag Extension. We're going to learn how to prepare healthy and nutritious meals at home during a live demonstration featuring recipes from the Penn State Extension Let's Cook series, a topic that is always important, but even more important here in the dead of winter while we continue through the current pandemic and many of us spend most, if not all, of our time at home. The recipe will be provided later. Tonight, Andy will be preparing chicken, walnut, and brown rice stir fry and honey lime quinoa fruit salad. I already had dinner, but I'm already hungry for a second one. The Penn State Extension Let's Cook series is designed to teach nutritious meals to prepare at home to maintain a healthy lifestyle. For a full list of upcoming events, please visit the link that's going to be dropped in the chat. And again, if you have any questions during the segment, please put those in the Q&A so that we can do our best to answer those. So about our presenters. Andy holds a bachelor's degree in food science from Penn State and a master's degree in management and leadership from Liberty University in Virginia. He is also a certified ServSafe instructor and proctor. His focus is providing food safety education to industry professionals, volunteer organizations, and individuals. Prior to joining Extension, Andy worked for the Hershey Company as a microbiologist. He was involved in developing environmental monitoring programs, incident troubleshooting, and supported Hershey's global laboratory network as the manufacturing lab coordinator. Andy also has experience in the retail food industry and worked as a restaurant inspector. Sharon currently serves as an extension educator and food safety specialist based at University Park. She holds a bachelor's degree in nutrition and a master's degree in education, both from Penn State. She provides community-based educational programs related to retail and consumer safety in Center, Mifflin, and Juniata counties. As the Retail and Consumer Food Safety Program team leader, Her responsibilities also include developing online education programs, program management, and coordination with extension educators across the Commonwealth. Sharon is also a registered dietitian with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and a licensed dietitian here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Welcome to Andy and Sharon.
Sean, do you have those slides? I see, I assume you're not watching a tennis match. I assume you're looking around on your screens.
That is correct.
Finding the right one.
We're looking up here right now.
All right. Perfect. So, like Sean said, Q&A button's down in the bottom, so feel free to interact with us by asking us questions that way. So before we start out, I just want to give you a little bit of background information about Penn State Extension. In case you've never heard of it before, or maybe heard of it, but weren't really sure exactly what it was. So Penn State Extension is a department within the College of Agricultural Science. And we take the university's research, resources, and expertise out into the community. We do that through working with individuals one-on-one, working with businesses, working with industry, and we have different focus areas across a broad spectrum of agricultural interests, like Sharon and I are on the food safety team. We've got resources for horticulture and dairy and community vitality. Also, some public programs that you might be familiar with, the 4-H Youth Development Program, Master Gardener, Master Watershed Steward Program. So we've got a wide variety of resources available to folks. We're doing a lot of webinars now. We have pre-recorded videos on our website and articles. And of course, you can always email us and ask us questions or give a call. We love to share our expertise with you. So you can visit our website, which is extension.psu.edu. So welcome to my Berks County kitchen. Sean, I started at the Berks campus as well, so a fun other connection. You're never too far removed from other Penn State alumni. So we are going to get started on the brown rice chicken walnut stir fry. So Sharon, if you want to come over here to the stove with me, I'm going to get the rice started. So we're using brown rice. And brown rice is great. It's a whole grain. I'm going to talk more about that in just a bit. But I've got that rice cooked off and I'm adding some flavoring to that. So we're adding some dried cherries, dried apricots, as well as a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. By mixing that in now, it's going to allow those dried fruits to kind of plump back up and rehydrate themselves and just let the rice kind of hang out on the side until we're ready for it. Actually, once rice is cooked and we just keep it warm and keep the lid on it, it stays, I don't know if fresh is the right term, but it stays nice and hot and ready to go. So over here on the island, we're going to start preparing some of the ingredients that we need. So obviously chicken stir fry, we're going to cut up some chicken. And this recipe uses 1/2 pound of chicken thighs. So I only need about half of this bag that I've got here. And chicken thighs are great because they've got a lot of flavor and they can be inexpensive, especially if you get them on sale. I do like to trim them. Sometimes there's a little bit of fat or some of that just things that we want to trim off, a little bit of skin. I bought skinless, boneless chicken thighs. You could buy them with the bone in, but then you've got to chase them chase them around, it's a lot easier to use the boneless. So just a quick note about food safety. So before we started, I washed my hands, I washed the countertop, and I'm using a red cutting board, one that I use for cutting up meat. Some people have a red one for beef and a yellow one for chicken, but I don't have that. So I'm just using this for my raw meat. I certainly would not want to um, use the same cutting board to cut my chicken on and then cut up some of the fruit and vegetables that we're using here later, because that could lead to cross-contamination. And that's when we transfer harmful bacteria from one surface to another, which can make us sick. We know, for example, with raw chicken, there's bacteria associated with that, which we take care of when the chicken is cooked, and it's not a problem for us anymore. But until that's cooked, that could be a concern. Or if we wash our cutting board, and I'm actually, I will wash my cutting board when I'm finished, but I'm going to use a different cutting board for the rest of the things that we're using tonight. So since I have raw chicken on my hands, I'm going to come over to the sink and wash my hands. So turn the water on, give my hands a rinse, and then adding soap. And we need to scrub for 20 seconds, hitting all of the portions of our hand. A lot of people just are in a rush and they just kind of go like this and say that they're done. We have to get between our fingers and around our fingernails, the backs of our thumbs, and really take our time on that. We're not relying on the chemicals in the soap to do the job for us. It's good old fashioned elbow grease and that physical friction and that mechanical action to remove bacteria and other contaminants from our hands. So it's really important that we wash our hands frequently enough and properly so that we're not making our friends and family sick when we go to serve them that food. I'm using a paper towel, just a small piece to dry my hands, and I'm using the paper towel to turn the water off. If I used the towel that everybody else used in the kitchen, I could be picking up bacteria. If I didn't wash my hands properly, put them on that towel, and the next person comes along and uses that towel, and their hands are dirty now as well. So I'm going to get my skillet ready over here on the stove. I'm going to turn my pan on medium-high heat. And this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And I'm actually measuring that out because that is an important factor in meeting the components of the DASH diet. So the recipe that this chicken walnut brown rice stir fry comes from our Let's Cook the DASH diet curriculum. And DASH is an acronym for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And part of this plan is limiting the amount of fat, especially saturated fat in our diet, because consuming saturated fat can raise our LDL cholesterol. Unsaturated sources of fat like the olive oil that I was using today are good. They're good for different functions of our body, for absorbing certain vitamins that's important, but we don't want to overdo it. So measuring out, as the recipe states, is a great way of keeping on top of that portion control for the fat. So we're going to let this chicken start to cook. I'm going to keep an eye on that while I go back over to the counter, and I'm going to start cutting up some vegetables. So the vegetables that we're using today are celery, shallots, and garlic. So I'm going to start with the celery. and I already washed the celery. It's important to make sure that we wash the produce. Even if it's going to be cooked, we want to make sure that we're washing it before we use it. That'll remove any physical dirt, and if there's any bacteria present, it will reduce the number of bacteria as well. So this is stir fry. You want a nice little bite of everything as you go along. I don't like gigantic chunks, but you don't have to make it in tiny chunks either. I'm using an 8-inch chef's knife. I'm keeping the pieces of food flat on the surface, and I've got my fingers curled down, made a little bear claw, keeping my fingernails down, and I'm using that to hold the items in place, and I'm able to work through them fairly quickly, and I'm less likely to get cut if I don't have my fingers out and in the way. So there's all kinds of celery still stuck onto my blade, so I'm going to wipe that off, but wipe away from the sharp part of the blade. You could also wipe this on the edge of the cutting board, or if you were putting it into a bowl or other container, that would be fine. So my cutting board is large enough. I'm just going to put this onto this side. I have a little bit more celery than the recipe calls for. The recipe calls for a half a cup, but that's going to be okay if I've got a little bit more. Those were big stalks of celery. I probably could have done just one, but I'm using 2.
Andy, I have a couple of questions that are coming in. Do you mind if
Oh,
I kind of pull some
go
questions in while you're
ahead.
going?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'll do in the future is as I'm getting ready, I'm going to hit this little button. If you hear
Okay.
that, then you can you'll know that there's a question come up. One of the questions
right.
we have is, can you use chicken breast instead of do you have to use chicken breast? What about salmon or tofu?
Salmon or tofu would be fine in this. The salmon, I wouldn't cook quite as long as the chicken. So you would want to modify your times a little bit. Speaking of the chicken, I don't want to forget about that. Just going to give that a little stir. Yeah, and tofu, that would be a fine. You could use whatever protein you like, and you could use chicken breasts if you didn't like the thighs.
Nice, thank you. So we also have a family is garlic intolerant. Is there a good substitute for garlic?
Well, you can simply just leave the garlic out. You could add some more onion if you like. The garlic's just there for flavor. It's not like taking out the chicken or the rice, so it's a fairly small component. So maybe just add a little bit more onion would be okay.
Awesome, thank you for that one. Next question is, what do you use to wash your vegetables?
Water. So water is the most effective thing that we can use to wash our vegetables. There are some commercial veggie washes out there made with things like citric acid. You hear things about using vinegar. You would never want to wash your produce in bleach. It's very easy to create a new problem, create a chemical poisoning situation there. So the thing with vegetables is we want a lot of running water. We can use our hands, like on the celery, to remove some of that dirt. If it's something that has a rough edge on the outside, you could use a clean produce brush, something to help you scrub, like a cantaloupe or something like that. But the point is a lot of water, and it doesn't count to just go under the water. We want a long time to give that a good thorough rinse.
Nice, those are great tips. Keep those Q and A's coming in. Andy's definitely willing to answer questions. We have a couple to save for later.
Okay.
A couple more are coming in. So yeah, continue on, Andy. Thank you.
Great. So what I'm doing right now is mincing the garlic. So the way I like to mince the garlic is I cut off that little bottom tough part, and then I take my knife, lay it flat, and I kind of point the blade away from me. and just give it a little punch. You could also use a glass if you don't want to have your hand near the blade. That's totally fine, and that will loosen the skin, and you can just break the skin right off. There's fancy gadgets that will help peel the garlic. You can use the garlic out of the can. I just like the freshness and the versatility of fresh garlic. Sometimes I will use a microplane and grate this into, I'm gonna turn my chicken down, I hear it sizzling. Sometimes I'll use a microplane and grate it into a dish if I don't want it to be quite as intense. You can certainly use a garlic press. The reason I don't use one is I don't have one. You could certainly do that, but to me, it's just one more thing to have to cut at the end or clean at the end of the day. So I'm just slicing this garlic up, and then I will go back over and continue to chop this. Now, I don't want somebody to bite down on a gigantic chunk of garlic, but it doesn't have to be super fine. As it softens, that will as it cooks, I'm sorry, it will soften. So I'm going to push that over to the side. The last ingredient, or the last vegetable that we're using, is shallots. You could certainly use onions if you can't find shallots. Shallots are just fancy onions. They're a little sweeter. They're smaller. You know, you can just use regular onions if you like, but I like them in this, and they're more unique. I don't use them all the time. They got two little lobes on the inside, so I like to just cut off the tops and bottoms, and then the skin kind of peels off, similar to an onion. Now,
Andy, while you're going on
yes,
there, we do have while you're working with those wonderful knife cuts, we do have a question about your knife. What
okay.
type of knife are you using?
I didn't hear the lion growl.
I did, but you were in the middle of talking. So
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay.
So here we go.
All right, there we go. Yes.
So
I'm sorry.
what
So
type
what
of
was the
knife are you
question?
using? It looks like I hear from Patty that it looks pretty easy to use.
Yeah, I love this. It's actually from Spain. My dad brought it home for me when he was there many years ago on a missions trip. And I like it because it's not super gigantic. I have larger ones. The shallot is making me cry, so I'm going to rinse my hands off so that I don't like drip big tears into the into the cutting board.
You're here with a bunch of Penn Staters. Don't cry, Andy.
Oh, I know, right? That's always like a challenge, cutting something onions on camera. It's like I said, about 8 inches, and I really like it. Something else is I get my knives professionally sharpened about twice a year. There's a local man who does it, and it hardly costs anything. I think it's because he knows my grandfather, and that really helps. Having them be sharp is great.
So another question we have is, when do you know if the chicken is cooked thoroughly? Not just for this recipe, but for future dishes as well.
We're going to talk about that.
Awesome.
So I want to point something out on this shallot. Sharon, if you could go back to the overhead, this shallot is moldy. And whenever food like this becomes moldy, the best thing to do is throw it in the compost bin. We don't know if that mold is an okay mold to have or not. Certain types of mold can produce toxins, which can collect in different systems of our body and make us sick later on. So if food gets moldy, we want to throw it out. Because I'm throwing out that shallot, I've got a little chunk of onion I'm going to replace that with. Back to the thing with the mold, we don't know how far that toxin travels inside the food. It varies with different foods. So some people say, oh, well, I'm just going to cut that little piece off and still use it. that may be okay. It may not be okay. So as the saying goes, when in doubt, throw it out. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take my vegetables over to the stove and add them to the chicken. I always like to add the garlic last, just because garlic can burn. So I like to have something else on hitting the pan first. I don't know if that really works or not, or if that's just my superstition. I'm going to go below my nose and wash my hands again, because those shallots were wicked. Are there any questions in the meantime, Alan?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that we can answer. So first off, can avocado oil be used as a substitute for olive oil?
Absolutely. You could use any kind of oil you like for this. Just something, you know, that's that you've got would be fine. The only thing I would say, coconut oil, you can certainly use that, but that you know, it does have a higher saturated fat content, so it would change the nutrition if you're looking at the nutrition facts at the bottom of this recipe. I do also need to give another disclaimer. I just washed my hands, but I didn't do it for 20 seconds. I wasn't worried about bacteria on my hands. I was worried about the onion juice on my hands from making my eyes water.
So another question we have.
Oh, go ahead.
This one has to do with celery. Do you ever use celery leaves for future cooking?
I have and I have not. Sometimes I'll keep them for stock maybe, but I've been getting into composting more over quarantine. This week, with it being so cold, it's more kind of like on a pile on top of the snow in the woods. But nonetheless, I stick them out there, but they're edible. You can use them as a garnish or put them in items. That'd be totally fine. I just chose not to use them today. Other questions?
Last question we have for right now, but I'm sure there will be a bunch more that will come in. Would this meal freeze well?
Well, I would recommend making the vegetables and the chicken ahead of time and making the rice fresh. When you freeze rice, it can tend to get kind of gummy and starchy. So it's not going to be a safety concern. It's just from a quality standpoint, not going to be quite as good.
Thank you. We are all caught up on our Q&A at this moment, but please keep those questions coming along, please.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit more while that's cooking about the DASH diet. So we talked about fat. We talked about grains a little bit when I said we were using brown rice. So brown rice is a whole grain, and whole grains are those that have the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. As the name implies, the whole thing is there. When we have refined grains, we remove the bran and the germ. And when we do that, that takes away some of the fiber, some of the iron, and the B vitamins. And then, you know, we add them back. So you will see fortified grains, but the whole grains are great because they've got that fiber. They've got all of those vitamins in them. And brown rice is a great way to get some whole grains into your diet. So that's another component of the DASH diet. Eating lots of fruits and vegetables. So we've got the vegetables here. The dessert has got some fruit in there. Lean meat, want to limit that to about 6 ounces a day or less. So this recipe only takes a half a pound of chicken and it makes 4 servings. So the vegetables and the whole grains really shine here. And the meat is kind of an accompaniment, which is different than we usually do. We usually think of meat as our main dish and vegetables as the accompaniment. And then limiting added sugar. And, you know, obviously we don't have any of that today. Finally, keeping an eye on our sodium and limiting our sodium intake. So this recipe doesn't have any added salt. And I'm really excited for you to try it with all these other flavors, the onions and the garlic and the cinnamon and the rice, adding some tarragon. So tarragon is in the licorice family. It has that anise flavor to it. And the way I'm preparing this is I'm just taking the leaves and the tender part of the stem. The bottom part of the stem can be a little tough and woody, so I'm not going to include that. And I've rinsed the herbs just like the other produce today, just wrapping this up into a tight little bundle so I'm not chasing it all over the cutting board, and running my knife through that, getting a nice fine little dice so that somebody's not chewing on a big leaf of tarragon. Also some chives. Some of them are going to go in it. Oh my goodness, these are gigantic chives. They're like all one piece. They just fold them over in the container. Of course, if I'd want long chives, I couldn't find them, but today I'm going to cut them up anyway. Some of these go in it and some of them go on as a garnish. So just multitasking here while the items are cooking, getting our garnish ready to go. So somebody asked earlier, how do we know if the chicken is finished cooking or not? So the only way to be sure is by using a food thermometer. I'm using a digital thermometer. There are also, oh, well, I have one here in the drawer. There are also some more analog style thermometers. The thing about the analog style thermometers is about a third of the way up the stem, there's a little indentation called the dimple. That's how far you need to insert the item that you're taking the temperature of. So common mistake people make is they use this type of thermometer and they give a dainty poke into something and then they try to get an accurate measurement, and that doesn't work. With the digital thermometer, it's nice because the sensing area is on the tip of the probe. So just a gentle little poke, I stabbed 2 pieces here, gives you an accurate reading. So the thermometer says 162. So we have a few more degrees to go. Chicken needs to be 165 degrees. And even though this chicken has some color on it, it started to turn brown, we don't want to rely on that. I love the Food Network. I grew up watching the Food Network. But one of my big pet peeves is when a celebrity chef will go up to an item and they poke it with their finger and they say, oh, you know, this is done. It feels like it's right. There is no amount of training or expertise that can let you know if meat is done without using a thermometer. That's really important. In the case of ground beef, there's instances where the ground beef can turn brown and it still hasn't reached the proper temperature, and vice versa. It can reach the proper temperature, but still be a little pink on the inside. 160 degrees, by the way, for ground beef, but 165 for chicken. So let this cook another minute or so. Just gonna give another double check to make sure that the chicken is properly cooked.
Andy, we have another couple of questions coming in as well. One of them was, can you send out the person, some information on the person that sharpens your knives? So if you can send that to me after you're finished cooking, we can send that out in an email to everyone. And then I had another question about washing.
I'll have to call my grandfather, so we'll need a day lead time on that.
We can just call your grandfather.
Okay, he would love that.
Another question was about washing chives. Do you soak your chives or do you rinse them? Do you wash them? How do you go about that?
I'm glad somebody asked that. When you're washing produce, you never want to soak it. You always want to rinse it, because if you soak it, you're just creating this gigantic bath where all the contaminants that you're trying to wash away are sticking on. And we're just, spreading what was contaminating one piece to the rest. So you always want to wash the pieces individually, or put them in a colander so you have a lot of water rinsing over them and taking those contaminants away.
Thank you. Another question that came in
Okay.
is, why are refined grains, rice, flour, etc., cheaper than whole grain options? Removing nutrients and fortifying them later seems wasteful.
Welcome to, this would be like a perfect food science, food facts and fads class discussion of why that is. A lot of it's just around production. That's what we like, and that's what the mainstream process is. So you've got manufacturing and purchasing in bulk, and it's just kind of one of those things of that's just kind of how it is. You're right. It's more highly processed, but costs a little more. So go figure.
Sean, it sounds like we have an upcoming name for another part of this, the next series, whenever we go into Cooking Classic later on in the year.
Okay, so the chicken is done. So I'm adding in the walnuts, the tarragon, and half of my chives went in the skillet. The other half went on the floor. Just going to let this heat up. When you're adding fresh herbs, you don't want it to cook it to death because you're going to lose that bright, fresh flavor. And now I'm going to add in our seasoned rice that has the fruit and the cinnamon in it. And I'm just going to mix this together. Turn the heat off because everything's cooked and hot. Just going to stir it together. And then I'm going to serve some. So this recipe makes 4 servings. So I'm going to attempt to plate just a quarter of this. It's a large serving, I think, depending on if you look at some other recipes, what the size looks like. All right, I'm going to go back to the overhead. And then I got the rest of my chives and put them on the top. And there is the finished stir fry. So now I'm going to do a little cleanup and then switch some gears to talk about the fruit salad. Were there any lingering questions from all of that?
Sorry, I went on to mute and didn't come off of mute. We do have another question. What is your favorite brand of cookware?
Oh, my favorite brand of cookware. Okay, well, usually before an extension meeting, we say that where trade names appear, no endorsement is implied. So I am not getting compensated for this, but if you look closely, you can see the logo on my pan. I like Calphalon. I just find that it's really heavy duty and durable and has always worked well for me.
Another question.
Okay.
What could any other type of nut be used besides walnuts?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I maybe well, I was gonna say maybe not peanuts, but sure, it's your dish. You can put peanuts in it if you want to. Just again, if you are following the DASH eating plan, get some ones that are unsalted. So these ones that I bought were unsalted.
And again, we did share that that link in the chat a little earlier, so keep that in mind too. We'll be sending all those links out in our follow-up email as well. Keep those
Great.
questions coming in. Andy's doing a great job of multitasking and answering those questions as we go ahead.
Okay. So we're going to move on now to the honey lime quinoa salad. So this is a unique fruit salad. So quinoa is another whole grain. It comes in a dried form, and it looks kind of similar to the finished form. I bought tricolor, so you don't have to. So you can see there's some red ones, some black ones, and some white. These are actually seeds. And I just like the tricolor ones because they look nice. And then you cook it similar to rice, and it kind of puffs up, and there's some little spiral pieces that come off. But something that's really important is you have to rinse it first. There's a component called saponin on the outside, and that has a bitter and soapy flavor. And even though you know, it may say that it's already pre-rinsed, you still want to rinse that before you prepare that. So I already cooked this and I let it cool because this isn't a hot fruit salad. So I let this just cool at room temperature for 15 or 20 minutes or so. I'm going to set that off to the side and start preparing our fruit. So the easiest one I'm going to start with is blueberries, and I'm actually going to measure this just to make sure that the proportions are correct. This also gets a glaze that goes on it, so I don't want to overdo it. So we've got a cup of blueberries. We also need a cup of blackberries, and these are kind of borderline of whether or not I think I'm going to. Sometimes if blackberries are small, I will leave them whole, but sometimes if they get a little larger, I think they the dish, I don't know if this is the proper term, it eats better if everything's a little smaller and you can get a nice representative bite from each one. Sometimes they're gigantic, and there's no question. I definitely like to cut them in half. And then some strawberries. So there's a lot of ways that you can top the strawberries. I like to just rip the stems off because it gives me a little more to work with. And these actually aren't bad. Sometimes the leaves are just gigantic and they're flopping all over the place. And then I still just take a small slice off the top. You can buy little tools that take the hulls out. You can use a drinking straw. I don't know. I saw that on Facebook. That seems like a lot of work to me. And just like the berries, I want to cut these up just so we don't get too big of pieces. I did rinse all of the berries thoroughly before we use them. It can be really tempting to just want to sneak a strawberry out of the container, but it's important to make sure that we have that rinsed off, that rinses off any contaminants from the field, but also anything from the grocery store that that got added. So we need a cup and a half of strawberries. So we're getting close here. I think one more will do it.
Andy, just as you mentioned the rinsing of the rice, there was a question that came in about that. So it was very timely. It was like you were actually right in tune with the Q&A, even while you were cutting.
Perfect. Last thing is a mango. So mangoes, when you buy them at the grocery store, you want to feel them. They should be soft. Admittedly, I only went to the grocery store yesterday, and this could be a little softer for my taste. So down where the stem is, it's a little bit wider of a base, and it gets a little bit more of a firm grip. The seed in here is kind of oblong. So what I like to do is take my knife, and again, I've got my fingers down. I'm in no way going to cut myself. cut down the side. And if I would have felt a little resistance, I would have had to move out a little bit more, but this pit is actually not that big. So I'm going to cut down both sides. And then there's still some usable parts on the end here. So I like to just kind of feel with my finger. Oops, and I could tell I'm hitting some of the pit still. So I'm going to move out just a little bit and get some more. You can, hack around at this a little bit more, just pick it up and eat it is a great way to use the rest of that. Now, these little pieces from the side, oh, I don't know if I want to do this today or not. Like I said, this should be a little bit more ripe. So I don't know how well it's going to work since this is a little more firm. Oh, it's actually working not so bad. Just using a drinking glass and sliding this down the edge to get the peel off. You could also just very carefully, what I usually do is use my knife. I put the flat side down, cut it into 3 strips, and then I very carefully lay the knife flat and go towards myself. I'm not pushing hard at all. I've got a sharp knife. I'm going very carefully, just pushing in about halfway and removing the peel. There's one more way that you can do this if you're not comfortable cutting either of these ways, is you take your piece and you cut some cross marks into the mango, both directions. And then you can kind of turn it inside out into these pieces, and you can use your knife to cut those pieces off. Some people like this because, if they've got the knack of it, it goes a little faster and it's already in chunks and you're not chasing those slippery pieces all around the cutting board.
Andy, that was a beautiful tip. That was spectacular.
There's lots of ways. There's lots of ways to do it. Now, these little pieces here, they're kind of slimy and slippery. So set them with the flat part down and just remember to keep your fingers out of the way when you are chopping. So we've got the quinoa, the strawberries, the blackberries, the blueberries, and the mango. Just going to give that a little bit of a stir. Now, the good part to flavor some of that quinoa is our honey lime glaze. So for the honey lime glaze, we need 1/4 cup of honey. One of my friends, what am I doing? I'm not even putting in the measuring cup. I just got it and I put it in the bowl. All right, so we have like an extra, I don't know, teaspoon or 2 that went right in the bowl. One of my friends, he and his dad have some beehives near me. So this is, I always feel good supporting them and getting some good local honey. So we've got 1/4 cup-ish, because I didn't measure correctly, of honey. Then we need 2 tablespoons of lime juice. So I washed my lime. Even though we're not going to use the zest, you could use a microplane and scrape off some of the zest, get more lime flavor. But I'm going to put it on my cutting board. I'm going to cut into it. I still want to wash it. I like to pick limes that feel heavy for their weight. That's a good rule for all produce. It should feel heavy for its size. And then I like to take it and roll it on the cutting board to release some of that juice ahead of time. Makes that a little easier to do. So I need 2 tablespoons, which is 1/2 cup. So I'm just gonna reuse this. This is a juicy lime. I think I got all the juice I need out of this 1/2. Just going to mix that lime juice into the honey. It will thin the honey out a little bit. If we just put the straight honey in there, it would kind of glob up and stick to all the pieces and not work very well. So just going to stir this up. If you had a baby whisk, that would be great too. But I got that nice and thin. So I'm going to pour this over the quinoa and the fruit. Give this another toss. And then usually I like to put this in the refrigerator a little bit before I serve it, but I'm going to serve it up today. A serving is 3/4 of a cup. So I want to show you what that looks like. My messy cutting board here. That's a bowl with 3/4 of a cup. And then I have some mint. You can garnish it depending on how fancy or not you're feeling. Take some of those little top stems, or you can take a few pieces of mint and stack them on top of each other, roll them up. This method works really good for basil as well. It's called a chiffonade. And it makes nice little thin strips that you can put on top to act as a garnish, but the mint really has a nice fresh flavor to it as well, that's really refreshing and is a great unexpected flavor. So there you have it. There's our 2 dishes, the stir fry and the fruit salad. Lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, some good, healthy, unsaturated fat, and fruits and vegetables.
Andy, nicely done.
So
we have a little bit of love coming in for you from an
okay,
anonymous
great.
attendee.
Hey, before we take some questions, because I don't want to forget to do it, Sean, can you pull up our last few slides? I do just want to let you know that if you're interested in hearing more about Penn State Extension, signing up for our newsletters, signing up to find out about when our classes are available, you can go to extension.psu.edu/connect. There's things there from the food safety, the food families and health teams, but anything you're interested in, you can sign up to receive. Also, on the next slide, we've got some opportunities, just telling you about the classes that we've got coming up on our Let's Cook series, the DASH diet, which would go into more detail than I did tonight, Mediterranean, weight management, charcuterie boards. We've also got a private virtual group cooking experience where you can book us to do something like we did tonight, but we do it in a smaller group so everybody can talk and cook together. We've got webinars and information on mental health, Alzheimer's, dementia, osteoporosis, so many things. We've also got information and webinars on home food preservation. We've got some upcoming webinars on the next slide there, Sean, if you could advance that, that talk about the topics that we've got coming up, some special settings. If you're really into charcuterie boards, you could come to our class on how to make them. And then our food preservation class, how to make some charcuterie accompaniments like pickled vegetables, chutneys, things like that. So now I would love to open it up and answer any other remaining questions that you've got.
We have, first off, is a little bit of love coming in for you. Andy, your technique and presentation are fabulous. Are you on the Food Network?
I'm not, but I did write an email to Paula Dean asking to come on her show. That's as close as I've got. Many years ago.
You're still waiting for the answer there, aren't you?
I'm still waiting.
The last question that we have that came through is, are there any other fruits that you could that could go on this as well? What about peaches or any other fruits?
Peaches would be great. I think often peaches and mangoes are interchangeable in so many things. So if peaches were in season, go ahead and use them. And that's another really important tip. Don't serve fruit that's out of season because it's going to be dry and cardboardy and flavorless, and it's not going to be a good experience. And especially if you have picky eaters or kids who really aren't sure if they like that food or not, don't serve them a bad version of it. Make sure it's good and in season. But yeah, you could swap out, if you wanted to use red raspberries in here, or you wanted to leave one of the fruits out, that'd be totally fine. You can have some experimentation with this. I would say I would not leave out the honey and the lime juice because the plain quinoa by itself is kind of bland. So you do need to flavor that up a little bit.
Awesome, thank you. And last question that just came in, and this will be our last question. Can you use lemon rather than lime?
Sure, that would be fine.
Awesome. Well, before I hand it back over to Sean and close out this evening, I want to thank everyone from the College of Agricultural Sciences and Penn State Extension for joining in. I do want to say that just over COVID-19, I will say that recent investments in Penn State Extension in the latest distance education infrastructure and practices allowed Extension to adapt seamlessly to the virtual education environment. As a result, Extension has exponentially increased their programming in 2020 with more than 22 million website page views. That's over 22 million and approximately 613,000 registrants for online courses. So if you've ever been interested in Extension, now's the time because it's making a resurgence. Not that it hasn't been around. We're ready to adapt to the virtual environment. So find out a little bit more about Extension. We do have all of those links that I put out there, and we will share those again in the emails and follow up. So Sean, if you want to take it away.
I do have to give a shout out. Thank you, Sharon, for helping behind the scenes with the cameras tonight.
Sharon made this spectacular. That's one of the reasons why the presentation was such a success. Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan, for doing a wonderful job with the Q&A. Thank you, Andy, for a great presentation and making me, and I'm sure the almost 180 folks who joined us this evening, very hungry for first or second dinner. And thank you also to Sharon.
I'm doing second dinner right now.
And thank you to Sharon for your amazing cinematography with the setup that you have. So definitely check out the links that Alan shared. Join some of the Ag Extension's famous alumni like Ben and Jerry, and take advantage of the great resources available to you as Penn State alumni with Penn State Ag Extension. And thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. As a reminder, you've heard us talk about it, you've seen it in the chat. We are doing this cooking classic partially to raise awareness of the continual plight of our Penn State students experiencing food insecurity. So we've shared that link in our chat here where you can learn more and make a difference for Penn State students across the Commonwealth. We hope to see you next week for our fourth and final night, which is ironically somewhat the opposite of tonight, Mallow Cups and Merlot, which will feature chocolate and wine, hosted by Penn State's Abington, Altoona, Barron, and Harrisburg alumni relations teams. And of course, those are open to all Penn State alumni and friends. So have a great night and stay well. We are
Penn State.
Penn State.